Hello and welcome to chapter number 12 of this Flutter course. In this chapter, which I'm very excited about, we're going to talk about a basic register screen. Well, up until this point, we've been really configuring if we go chronologically, we've had the introduction, we've gone through so many chapters to talk about Dart and its basics and even some more advanced topics such as generics. Um, uh, and then as soon as we did that, then we uh, basically started learning about setting up our iPhone and Android application. And also after that, the iPhone and Android application together with certificates, profiles, and got SCRCPY working. So there's been a lot of information up on this till this point, so many hours of information that you can go back and watch. And I strongly suggest that you actually do that because I've explained everything in such extensive detail that I feel like explaining all those things again and again will be a waste of time both for you and me. And in this chapter, we are going to use all that information that we've learned in the previous chapters and start actually creating a registration screen, a simple registration screen in our Flutter application source code that talks with Firebase. And Firebase we set up in the previous chapter, if I'm not mistaken. So have a look at that chapter if you haven't set up your Firebase app backend, or at least, we haven't really set up anything. We've just actually set up. Yeah, we could say set up, but we haven't really configured in such great details. It's just like we've set it up. So have a look at that chapter, please, if you want to, before you continue with this chapter. So I'm going to go to my captions here and just ensure that I can show you the correct captions. Now, what we need to do in this chapter is to start working on our registration screen. And what I'm going to do here is bring up a caption for you so that you know what we're going to do. The first thing you need to do is to bring your Visual Studio Code or your editor of choice on the screen. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to bring my Android phone mirrored on the screen with SCRCPY. And then I'll see if I can bring my face to the right so you can see a little bit of a bigger screen. And what we need to do here now is to go in this main Dart file and remove everything that is a comment. Now, if you're coming from like a design background or a product owner or whatever background that is not software development related, if you're coming from those backgrounds, then you may not know what a comment is. However, I'll tell you now, a comment is a piece of information, piece of text that is written inside a source file, such as this main Dart file, that doesn't translate to an actual code. So it's information placed there, usually for other developers or whoever is looking at the code so that they understand the code a little bit better, okay? Comments in Dart can be created in different ways. However, the most usual way of doing it is with double forward slashes, as you can see here, and a space and then some text. All right. So I'm going to need you now to go into your main Dart file, and we're going to remove all these comments right now because they are basically creating a lot of noise for us right now. Okay. So let's go ahead and remove all those gray lines or whatever color they're displayed on your screen. They may be green, depending on your theme. I have Tokyo Night, as I mentioned before, in Visual Studio Code. So comments are displayed in gray. Gonna remove all that comment there. Okay. And that's it. So, and I think this as well. And I don't know. Yeah. And this seems also like a comment. So yeah, I think now we've removed all the comments. So if I do Command S, that does a hot reload. And I'm actually going to talk about what a hot reload is. But if you've done this, then you're good to go. I'm going to take that in my notes so we've talked about it. Now, the next topic to talk about here is hot reload versus hot restart. Now, these two are so important for you to understand that I think you should get this before you continue with the rest of the course. And I'm going to do my best to explain what hot reload and hot restart are. If you're, for instance, coming from a design background where you have, for instance, Figma, you design your stuff, you're putting some vectors on the screen, you're dragging images, and I can go in your Figma design and literally observe you as you're doing that. So I'm actually looking at your changes. You don't have to press any publish button, nothing like that. Even if you're in your drafts, I can still follow you and watch you as you're designing. Now that feature is very, very much possible in Flutter as well. However, the cost of doing that, the same thing that Figma does, is quite heavy, because as I'm changing my code, I'm not going to be able to see my changes unless I tell Flutter that, okay, I've made some changes, show me them on the screen. That is hot reload. Okay. For instance, if I go in here and I say Flutter demo homepage and remove the demo homepage from here, and press Command S, that's going to save my file, which in turn is going to do a hot reload. Okay. So Command S. You can see this title now was changed from here. So it says now Flutter demo. I'm going to change it back. Command S, hot reload, and it's going to say homepage. Now you can also avoid, for instance, doing Command S and just go in here in your Visual Studio Code or Android Studio and just say hot reload. So, and I can see now that didn't actually do it. That was great, because I can see a little like blob here. You see the circle on this file. This in Visual Studio Code is an indicator of a file that has not been saved. So if I save it, in it itself is going to do a hot reload. So I don't have to actually manually press the hot reload button. So save, and then you can see the changes immediately applied there. However, some changes to your code are going to be so big that Flutter is not able to resolve the delta from the previous state of the application to the new state. And we will come to those changes. It's very difficult to explain them right now, but just know that hot reload usually works in 99 something percent. Like, I'm making up statistics here. In most cases, hot reload works in that it can show you your latest changes. However, sometimes your changes may be so drastic and so big, and the calculation of the delta from the previous state to the new state may be so big that Flutter isn't able to do that. So then you will have to do hot reload, and then hot reload is here. Sorry, hot restart. You'll have to do a hot restart. Sorry about that. So there's more differences between them, like internally about the state, like the state of your application, and whether one keeps your state and the other one loses your state. So I'm not going to talk about that right now, because we haven't even talked about states in Flutter. So I don't think it makes so much sense to talk about that right now. Just know that in most cases, hot reload displays your latest changes, and it's sufficient if you just do a Command S and save your files. But hot restart, it will basically kind of like rebuild your application with new states. Okay. So I think to be honest with you, that's sufficient for now. So what we need to do now is to have a look a little bit about at restructuring the code that is created for us by default. And as you can see here, we don't really know how these things work right now. You don't even know, like in the caption, I say material app inside run app and homepage widget. What does this mean? Well, you don't know that, and that's okay. I'm not going to like confuse us right now with too much detail, but what you'll need to know right now is that, let's go in here, and I'm going to bring the logs up. What I'm going to do in here, in this build function of my app, just go and type print building. Okay. And Command S, and then you'll see that printed to the screen. So every time I'm pressing Command S, this entire application is being built again. And that is a little bit of like a resource hog, because as you can see here, material application is the entire kind of like a scaffolding, entire frame of your application, including the bar on top, including this white view here, and including that badge up there on the top right. It's like you are pretty much building things that you don't need to build every time you save this file. So it's a little bit of like a problem of performance, whether you want to do that or not. But in this course, I'm gonna give you some advice on how to make your application also run a little bit faster. So to do that, what we need to do is just to tell Flutter that, hey, look, we don't want to build the entire app every time, or the app structure every time we're pressing Command S to hot reload. So your challenge here now is to, if I get rid of this, what we need to do now is, you can see here in the main function, which is the root function that Flutter calls when it actually runs your application, it says, okay, I'm running an app called my app. And if you look at my app, the only thing it does, it actually creates a material app. That's all it does. So what you need to do now is to grab this material app. So I'm just going to say Command X on Mac, or Control X, I think, on Windows and Linux. Grab that, and instead of this const my app, paste that in there, okay? And then kill your my app, boom, like that, okay? And then do Command S, and just to make sure everything's working correctly, I'm just going to do a hot restart, and you can see everything is working as it should. So what we did here really was, actually, let's see, my homepage. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So what we have now is just the main function and something called my homepage stateful widget. All right. So get your code also to this state. I'm going to take in my notes that I've talked about that. All right. So the next thing we need to talk about is stateless versus stateful. Now, state, I mean, for me, it feels like, for me to be able to explain this, I need to first explain what a state is. Let's say in here, I press this button 5 times, okay? And then I go and I say, oh, I want to change the title of this little label there. And I'm going to say you've instead of you have. Or yeah, let's convert this to double quotes because we're putting a single quote in there. I'm going to say you've pushed the button this many times. And I'm going to say Command S or Control S in Windows and Linux to hot reload. Hot reload. Yeah, Command S. Okay. And you can see it said you've pushed the button this many times, but it kept the number 5. So if it rebuilt this application or this widget, or this thing that you can see on the screen, how did it keep the state? Well, that is because hot reload is able to sometimes, as I mentioned before, keep your state, and state is just data. Data usually mutated and created either by the application or the user or both. And in this case, this is a state that the user is controlling. So by pressing the button, he or she is increasing this number. Now it's 10, okay? A stateful widget, it can keep that information. So you see, it has something called a counter. It's an integer, and it keeps hold of that number. So, and upon this number being changed, it can kind of redraw itself. So stateful widget is something that is on the screen, usually something that you can visibly see, such as this screen, the white screen you can see here, stateful, and it can contain data upon whose changing it can redraw itself. So had we had the same widget, as you can see in my homepage, and it was stateless widget, which is available as well, you see, stateless widget, it wouldn't necessarily be able to redraw itself or contain any mutable data. I mean, even stateless widgets, for those who are a bit more familiar with Flutter, you'll have like value notifier and builders. So even stateless widgets can be redrawn depending on what you're trying to do, but they cannot contain mutable variables. So that is kind of like the difference between stateful and stateless. So you can see here, this is a variable that is not read-only. Otherwise, it would be final. So if I make this final, you can see it says, oh, you can't reassign this value to something else. So just know that if you see stateful widget, then it is a widget that contains information that can be changed as the user interacts with the widget, or as time goes by, or as the widget sees fit. However, stateless widget is a widget who doesn't contain any mutable pieces of information and doesn't manage any mutable pieces of information internally. Okay, that's a lot of just a lot of talk. I know if you're not comfortable with, like, if you haven't done software development before, you may not, this may not make any sense to you. And I promise you, as we go on in the course, you're going to learn more about it. So don't worry about it if you didn't get this on the get-go. So you can see now, let's see. Let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to actually tick this in the in my notes. Okay, so I can see in my notes that I had that as part of what I was going to explain here, I was actually I had planned. I can see in my notes I had planned in one of the previous captions here. As part of this caption, I was actually supposed to completely kill this my homepage widget. And I was supposed to actually create a widget just called homepage. So let's do that. Let's just go back into that caption. So kill this my homepage, and now go in here and change this to homepage. So what we need to do now is to create a very simple homepage. Okay, so I'm gonna remove this title from here as well. And you can see now we have an error telling us that, okay, I don't know what homepage is. Now, what we need to do is to create a, actually, let me see if I plan to create a stateless. Yeah, stateless widget, okay? A great shortcut that you need to know in Visual Studio Code, and I think it may be available in Android Studio as well, is if you want to create a stateless widget, just type STL. And you can see it tells you that, okay, you want to create a stateless widget. Great. Okay, there it is. Then you give it the name of homepage. Okay, so now you have a homepage. Great. And I'm going to do a Command S. And now you can see this is one of the times that Flutter was like, okay, I don't understand what you're trying to do. You changed some stuff in this main function and I can't do hot reload. So you have to do a hot restart. So now the screen's kind of going to be black. So now we have what I had planned in the course initially for this chapter. So great. Let's go now to the next point. So you can see the screen is black here, and that's because of this container. There is a little container. There is something on the screen that you can't really see because it's just black. So you could go in here and say there's a color, and you could say colors red and just Command S, and you can see now the screen is red. So just know that there is something on the screen, but you just can't see it because it's all black. So the way to get your application to a point that is actually like presentable to a user, you usually have to create something called a scaffold. Now, a scaffold, as its name indicates, is kind of just like the basic building structures of an application that kind of makes it presentable to a user, to an average user. So even though if you are creating like a graphically intensive application, this black background may be completely okay. But in most applications, when you run them, then you'll get like a bar on top that tells you like the name of the screen that you're on, kind of like the title of a web page. And you'll also get some like a status bar on top where, as you can see here, the status bar is kind of like black with all white icons on top, and it will give you like a white screen where you can interact with your content. So we don't have that, and in order to create that, you have to create something called a scaffold. So go to your container here and say scaffold. Okay, now I'm going to press Command S, and you'll see all of a sudden then we get this little white screen here, and then there's a little tint on our status bar as well, so it makes it a little bit more presentable. Okay, so what we need to do now, I'll basically see if I've planned to add some bar title in here, which I haven't. So let's do that right now. So for our scaffold, we're also going to add something called an app bar. So go to your scaffold and say app bar, and then say I create a new instance of the app bar class. All right. And in here, there's a property called title. And as the title, say text. Okay. And for the text, I'm going to get rid of all this documentation. There's just excessive amount of documentation here, which kind of blocks the screen. So, and for the text, just say register, for instance, and make it a constant. So, and put a comma here and a comma here as well. So you see, after you've done that, your screen has a beautiful blue bar here with the title of your application or the title of your homepage. And there is a white canvas here for the rest of your content to be displayed. So now there are a few things in here which I could jump over, but I kind of feel like they're so important to explain that I'm going to do that right now. So in Flutter, every time you have, for instance, here, there is a text, you see, there's an app bar. An app bar, if you go into the source code of an app bar, let's go a little bit higher, you can see it says I'm a stateful widget. All right, so app bar in itself is a widget. So what we're doing here is saying we have something called a scaffold. Let's go to scaffold. It itself is a stateful widget. So we're saying the main widget we're returning from our build function, as you can see, it should return a widget, is a scaffold, which is a stateful widget. In itself, it has a property called app bar. An app bar in itself is a stateful widget, which in turn has a property called title. Now the title, if you look at the documentation, it says title is also a widget. So let me also make the screen a little bit bigger like this so you see it better. So now the title is a widget and we're saying, oh, we're going to use a text widget. If you look at text, what it is a stateless widget. It means internally its state or its state can change and it doesn't have any mutable variables. Okay. Oh, I didn't want to change that. So if you see what we're doing here, when in Flutter, you're just creating widgets everywhere. In Flutter, almost everything is a widget, either stateful or stateless. And you need to kind of try to stick to stateless widgets as much as you can. All right. We're going to talk more about stateful and stateless. So now that we've added the scaffold and I've explained a little bit about these widgets that we've created and we've done a command S here just to hot reload the application or this widget. What we need to do next is to create a login button. So let's go and create some sort of a login button. And you can see here, I've written the caption button on homepage in the center to log in. Or more accurately, it could actually be register. So I'm going to change that. I'm going to say register button and button on the homepage in the center to register. Okay. Display the caption to you there. And I'm going to change my notes here just quickly. All right. So now your task is to create a button on the screen. How do you do that? Well, in scaffold, you see the scaffold at the moment, it's the owner of that bar on top and it's the owner of this white content here. So what you need to do is to go and look at a property called body. And body is in itself, if I move my mouse over, it says, okay, give me a widget, you see. And of course I could say, well, I have no widgets. Null is also acceptable. But in this case, we're going to create a button called text button. So text button is a widget. If you go into the source code, you'll see it's a text button style button, and that is a stateful widget. All right. So you're basically saying that I'm creating a button and I want to allow the user to do something with it. All right. So what you need to do, as you can see, there is a little bit of an error here that says unpressed is a parameter that you haven't provided to me. So we need to tell this button that when this button is pressed, it needs to do something. And this is a requirement for the text button class that it's telling you, well, I'm a button. What do you want me to do when I'm pressed? If you don't provide the unpressed parameter to me, I'm not even a button. I could just be a label. And that is what this error is all about, is saying that if you're creating a button, make sure that you handle what happens when the user presses on it. So in here, just type unpressed. And I'm just going to get Visual Studio to complete this code for me. You can see it says, okay, an empty function, a function with empty list of parameters, so no parameters. And then the code in itself is empty at the moment. Okay, so go after the creation of that function, and then you see that there's another error that you have to handle that says child. You see, text button, you would probably just assume that, oh, a text button should have some sort of a string parameter that says, what is my text? So if we write child here, the beauty of Flutter is that it says child is a widget. So text button doesn't make any assumptions about what content you want to display on that button. What it does is says, I need to display some widget anything. It could be an image, it could be an icon, it could be whatever, it could be a list of things, which is not a good idea to do, but you could still do that. So um, go and create a child widget. And now you've learned about the text widget. So I'm just going to say a constant text widget. And in here, we're just going to say register. Okay. Now Command S, and you'll see now all of a sudden you have a register button there. So another cool feature now I want to show you in Visual Studio Code, and I think it's available also in Android Studio, is that you can go and wrap your widgets with other widgets. So instead of, for instance, saying that I want the text button to be in the center, and then you go and create a center widget, which you know it also exists, you could do command dot or command dot on Mac or control dot in Windows and Linux in Visual Studio Code on the widget that you want to wrap in some other widget. And then you will get this beautiful menu that says you know you can wrap it with many different things. So I'm just going to for now say wrap with center. So as you can see, center is a widget that has a child property. All center does is that it tries to center horizontally and vertically its child inside the available space of the center widget itself. The entire available space in this case, as you can see, is this entire white background. So center has access to that entire white background right now because center is the root widget of our body, which is the only thing that our scaffold is showing at the moment. So center then is able to center align this text button. So let's Command S, and you can see the register button is centered horizontally and vertically in the available space. Now that I've talked about that, I'm going to take it here. And what we're going to do here is very, very important. So what we need to do is we now need to handle when the text button is pressed that we're going to register a user with Firebase. Okay. Now, we talked about this when I talked about like Dart in the previous chapters. We talked about synchronous and asynchronous, and I'm not going to go into details about that. Now, registration, sorry, I'm not going to talk about that in details because we've talked about that in details before. So if you need to know about that, I think synchronous and asynchronous were probably explained in, I'll have a look at my notes. They were explained in chapter number 7. So if you haven't watched chapter number 7, I strongly suggest that you do that if you don't know what sync and async are. What we need to do now is to tell Firebase to register a user. Now, registering a user with Firebase is an asynchronous task, so it's not going to complete immediately. So what we need to do now is to tell Flutter that the button press is an asynchronous task. And all you need to do here is just to put the keyword async in there, okay? So that is that. Let's see in my notes. I've talked about it. Now, what we need to do is to have a look at this link that I've provided for you. I'm going to close this Safari window. Let me see if I can show you on this screen other sign-in methods. Great. You can see, as I'm displaying here, Firebase allows you to enable various sign-in methods for your users. So Firebase is not only limited to like Google services. It can, as you can see, it can allow you to enable Facebook sign-in for your users, or Apple sign-in, Twitter, or phone number sign-in. So there are various methods available for you to enable in your Flutter application. And in this application, we're going to use email and password sign-in. And there's like documentation about all of those in this link that I've provided to you. So I'm not going to go through the entire contents of this, to be honest with you, because there are just so much information and we're not interested in all of these. But still, I believe if you're interested in Firebase and Firebase Authentication, which we are going to use in this course, it is great if you could just have a look at this link that I've provided for you here. So what we need to do now it's also right. I've written here that I need to talk about a little bit about anonymous users. You see, Firebase, when you start your application and you kick Firebase, you basically start the whole process of Firebase. You say Firebase start. Firebase is amazing in that on the client side, it by default creates something called an anonymous user. So if you talk with Firebase with your Flutter application and say, who's the current user, even if you haven't done anything with Firebase before, if you haven't configured it, oh, actually, you have to configure it, which we have already done. But if you haven't called any Firebase functions before in your application, you could just say, Firebase, who's the current user? And Firebase will just tell you, here's the current user. It's an anonymous user. So that user is pretty much never going to be empty. It's never going to be null or nil or whatever you like to call it. So, or if you're Python developer, you just call it none. So that user is almost never none. So just know that Firebase has the concept of anonymous users. Okay. I'm just going to tick that in my notes that we've talked about it. So what we need to do in the next step, I'm going to bring the caption up. So we have to kind of like speed things up a little bit here because there's so much to talk about. What we need to do here now is just to create two text fields now, one for the email and the other one for the password. And we are going to then put our button next to those two text fields. So text field 1, email, text field 2, password, and then the register button as the third component. Now, if you have components like this that you want to stack vertically, one on top of each other, and one after each other, then you need to use a widget called column. All right. So what I'm going to do here is go here to the center and kind of like remove that. I'm just going to say command dot in Mac or control dot in Windows and Linux and just say remove this widget. Okay. I don't want a center anymore. Command F, see the results, register buttons on top left. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to command dot again and say wrap with column. Okay. Now, if you command S, you'll not see anything directly on the screen. No changes. All right. But what was created for you is a column widget with children property, which is a list of widgets that it can display. So the first thing we're going to do is to create two text fields. Okay. So let me have a look here and just make sure. Yeah. I'm just going to say a text field and another text field. Okay. Like that. If I save, you'll see two text fields displayed there. So I can actually go in there and start typing something. Okay. Like that. So now we've created two text fields with a column on the screen. I'm going to note that tick it in my notes. So we've talked about it. Now what we need to do is grab the text that is displayed in these text fields, and when you press the register button, pass that to Firebase. Okay. Now you see, I'm telling you that when you press the button, you need to grab the text inside these text fields. But inside this function of onPress, you have no access to these text fields. Okay. So you kind of need to pass information from this text field and this text field to a text button. And the way to do that is using something called a text controller. So a text or a text editing controller. A text editing controller is kind of like a proxy object that you pass to your text field, and the text field, it writes its current text all the time to that text editing controller. And in your text button here, then you can say controller text. Okay. So you can then, so it's kind of like if your text field is sitting here and your text button is sitting here, then you'll have something here in the middle that is your proxy, the text editing controller, that is grabbing the latest information from the text field, and then your text button can read that information. Okay, so just know that a text editing controller is kind of like a proxy. Now that we need to manage some state, we need to manage this proxy object, then we need to convert our homepage to a stateful widget. Okay, so go in here to your homepage, command dot, and say convert to stateful widget. So all of a sudden it's stateful widget. All right, so now what we need to do is to go and create those two text editing controllers. So I'm going to go in here, go to your homepage state here, and say late final. What do we call them? Do I have any specific desire here? Let me see my notes. No. So there's no desire really for the naming. So let's just say late final text editing controller, and let's call it here email. Okay. And the other one, I'm just going to say password. Now, in the previous chapters, we haven't talked about late. What late is a keyword in Dart that tells your program that although this variable has no value right now, but I promise to assign a value to it before it is used. So it's kind of like it's a contract. So late literally means that I'm not ready right now. I will do it later. I'm not ready to assign a value to this. So what we need to do now um, is to create these values. Now, you need to also know something about stateful widgets. Now that our homepage state is a stateful widget, it will have two two great functions. One is called init state, I believe, and the other one called is disposed. Now, init state is a function that will be called by Flutter automatically when it creates your homepage. So it says, okay, now you have the ability to create all your variables or your late variables once. Now, whenever this homepage then dies and goes out of the memory or is trying to go out the memory, it will also get a function called dispose. So you've said that in the contract, I've written that I'm going to provide a value for these email and password text editing controllers. And the best way to do that is to go into this init state function here and assign those to proper values. So I'm just going to say email is text editing controller, like that. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the password field. Now, you also need to understand that after you've created these two, you also need to dispose of them. All right. So go in and override your dispose function and then say email dispose and password. So a lot of developers forget to do these, especially like newcomers. So don't make that mistake. So you created the text editing controllers and you're also in charge of disposing them. Okay. Now, so we've done that already. After you've created your text editing controllers, you need to go to your text fields and assign those controllers to your text field. So in here, there's a parameter called controller and just say email. And for your text field on the second one, which is for your password, say controller, it's password. So what is happening now is you hooked this proxy update that sat here, this one, which is your email or password text editing controller, to your text field that is sitting here. Okay. You still haven't hooked it to your text button, which is sitting here. So this link is kind of broken and we're going to fix that soon. Okay. Take it in the notes that we've talked about that. So what we need to do now at the moment, if I press Command S, you'll see no visible changes on the screen. However, there's a little bit of a problem with our text fields. As you can see, they don't have any hint. They don't tell the user what they expect the user to actually enter. So what we need to do now is to go and add something to these text fields called a hint. A hint is a piece of information provided to the user in usually kind of like very subtle color that tells a user about the information that this text field expects them to enter. And that hint will automatically be removed as soon as the user types at least one character on that text field, okay? So let's go to the first text field and say decoration, and I believe it's an input decoration, and then say input decoration, okay? And for the hint, there's so much information on the screen, we can't see anything. There is a hint text, as you can see, hint text, and it expects a string. So in here, say, please enter, or just say, enter your email here. And you can see it's suggesting this to be a constant. So I'm going to make it a constant. And a little bit of a comma there as well. And you can see now it says, enter your email here. And copy and paste this decoration as well and put it in the next text field. So say that enter your password here. And so it's enter your email here, enter your password here. So let me also make sure that that is correct there and take it in the box. So then if you start typing in those fields, you can see that the hint disappears as soon as you type something. And if you remove that character, then the hint also disappears. And the same thing for the password. Okay. So we've now got the groundwork, like the base work done here, and we need to get to the authentication. So when you press this text button here, we need to do authentication, and that means we're just going to register for now. So what you need to do is you need to import Firebase. So Firebase was our dependency, and using the import statement, you can actually grab the content that it was created for Firebase and bring it into your source code. Okay. So as you can see here, we're gonna bring package, Firebase auth, and Firebase auth Dart. Okay. On a command S, you don't see any difference on the screen because an import statement doesn't really change the state of your application as such. And after the importing, we need to, I'm going to take it here as well, that we've talked about it. So what we need to do now is to, upon pressing this button, we're going to get your username and password from these text fields. So let's say final username, or sorry, email. And I'm going to say the email field text. I'm going to say final password is password text. Okay, so we're going to our email and password controllers and grabbing their text, which is the latest text that the user entered in those fields. Okay. So after we've done that, now you can go and say Firebase auth instance, and then you will say create user with email and password. You can see this is a function that allows you to register or create a user, as its name indicates, with Firebase. So I'm going to do that. So as you can see here as well, this thing returns a future. Okay, so this is nothing that you can just like call and say, hey, do this now, without actually awaiting on it. Otherwise, it will just say, here, I'm a future. I'm something that I will calculate something in the future. And by not putting a wait before that call, you will only get the instance of future. You will not actually get the work that it's doing. You will get like a wrapper around the work saying that this is the kind of work I'm going to do. But if you await on it, it will actually perform the work, if that makes any sense. So I've explained await in that chapter. I think also chapter 7 or whatever it was when we talked about more advanced topics in Dart. So please have a look at that chapter as well. After doing that, you will see that the return of this is actually a future of a user credential. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say final user credential is this, and then I'm going to print it, user credential. Okay. So command S and just hot restart here just in case, because we did an import. So what I'm going to do in enter email here, I'm going to say pixelityab@gmail.com. And for the password, I'm just going to say foo baz. Okay. So let's bring our console up so we can see what our application prints to the screen. And I'm just going to say register, which we're going to get an error for right now. So, and you can see here, it says no Firebase app default has been created. Call Firebase Initialize app. So this is really good that we're getting this, because I actually have planned for us to fix that. But before we go ahead and do that, I should probably explain what this is, why this is happening. You see, Firebase, there was, if you remember when we configured it, there was a file created here for us called Firebase options, and it has a lot of code in it. And then there's like a configuration here. Here you see Android. For iOS as well. Now, what Firebase is complaining about is saying that you've created this configuration, but you've never actually told me about it. So poor Firebase. So what we need to do now, before we actually do the configuration, is to fix something that you can immediately see on the screen, which is incorrect. You see, foo_baz is your password. It shouldn't be visible to the user. So when you're typing it, it should be a password field. And at the same time, this field here, you see, is an email field, but where's the @sign? @sign isn't immediately visible here. So you need to tell these text fields to be configured in a specific way so that they're actually suitable for email and password registration fields. So I'm going to get rid of this bar on the right, on the left. And what we need to do is to bring up the caption for the next thing, for the next topic to talk about. First, what we're going to do is to make this password text field secure. So what you need to do here in your decoration of the password field, go in here and say obscure Actually, it's not in the declaration, it's right here, obscure text. And say that's true. And if you press S on that, you'll see that your text is now obscure. Also, you need to do enable suggestions, false. And then you will also do autocorrect, false. These are three important properties to provide here. Now you see, enabled suggestions is usually like as you're typing in a text field, depending on your operating system, it will provide you suggestions like this. In a password field, you don't want to do that. You don't want to have any suggestions. So that's for enabled suggestions. Also, autocorrect is when you try to type something and you all probably know what autocorrect is, so I'm not going to explain it. So you're disabling autocorrect basically on your password field, which makes sense. So now let's go and bring these two properties also to our email field, which is here. Okay. And what we're also going to do is to tell it that it is an email, it needs an email keyboard. So let's go in here and say input or keyboard, I think, type, and it's called text input type, I think, and then dot email. Where's it? Email address. So save it. Now, if I then go here, you can see there's an @ sign. So I can, oh, sorry, you can't see it. So I'm going to do this so you can actually see the @ sign. So you can see their keyboard here, and then there's an @ sign right there. Okay. So that's for that. And then suggestions are also disabled. So as I type, there's no suggestions really for my text, because you don't want suggestions on email fields. Emails are usually like crazy text. So, or not usually, but sometimes. So you don't want any suggestions there. Okay. We've done that. I want to tick all of these items as done in my notes. Now, the next thing we need to do is to fix that initialization of our Firebase app. So we're going to do it naively right now. So I'm going to go, because you see, we still have this error. So if I bring this up, clean the errors, and then say pixolityab@gmail.com, and I say fubarbaz, I say register, we will still get this error that says no Firebase app is configured. Okay. So what we need to do is to actually initialize Firebase before we do Firebase instance create user with email and password. So what we need to do then is to go here and say Firebase initialize Firebase app. Let's see what we have there. Firebase auth instance or initialize app. I've actually forgotten the syntax for that. So let's see if we actually can learn how to do that by going to our Firebase options, initialize. You can see it should be done like this. And what we need to do then is to import Firebase options as it's showing here, Firebase options, and then await Firebase.initialize app with this. Okay, so let's kind of grab that code and then go into our main Dart file and import Firebase options. So I'm going to go here and say import Firebase options. And right before we do the registration here, I'm going to do this code that was provided there for us. So I'm going to remove the comments, Command S, and I can still see that Firebase isn't imported. So we're going to import it by doing import library package Firebase core here. What I did here is that I basically took advantage of something that's built into Visual Studio Code in order for me to get the import statement automatically. So I'm going to do command dot on it, and it says, okay, import this Dart file. So I'm just going to take advantage of that. Why not? And you can see that it is imported here, Firebase core. So now that we've done that, I'm going to press Command S. My state is preserved in the in my phone here, and let me bring the logs here, clean them, and then I'm going to press the register button. Boom, here, and we got an error here, and it says device unlocked, initializing all Firebase APIs, and Firebase is preparing to create, blah blah. And let's actually see what the error was. So It is unhandled exception, request failed, and unreachable host. And that is probably because I actually don't have proper internet connection on my phone here. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to go to settings. Actually, great that you're seeing these errors because these things do happen. So, and I'm going to turn Wi-Fi on. So make sure that it's going to connect to a valid Wi-Fi here. And it connected. I'm going to go back to the application, clear the logs. Oh my God, there are so many things displayed there. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat the same thing. I'm going to say register now. So now we got to the next state that I had prepared, that it says, you can see in the errors, it says configuration not found. Now, what is happening here, I'm going to take in my notes that we've talked about the other part of the code. What is happening here is that we haven't actually told Firebase that we are going to take advantage of email and password signing combination. As I told you before, there are various ways for Firebase to allow us to register a user. Apple login, you can do email and password combination, you can do Facebook, you can do Google, maybe Twitter as well. Yeah, I think Twitter was there as well. So you need to tell Firebase that we basically want to allow this combination. All right. So now that I've explained that, let's bring up Safari or your favorite browser, maybe Chrome, and let's go to console, Firebase, google.com. I'm going to bring my browser on the screen so you can also see it. And I'm going to then find our application, which was called My Notes Flutter project. Okay, so go to consolefirebase.google.com and find your project that you created in the previous chapter. Click on it. Then go to authentication as I show you here, and let's see. Authentication, get started. And in sign-in methods, what we need is this email and password combination. So go email and password combination and just allow it. All right. So, and then press save. And that's it. That's all you have to do. So I'm going to grab this screen, just kind of bring it to another monitor so you don't see it, clean the logs, and then say register. So you can see now, all of a sudden, you got user credentials back from Firebase. So you actually could now register your application, like register a real user with Firebase. Like that is actually magical. So I'm going to click on my notes that I've talked about that. So, however, you see, this is a little bit problematic in that by pressing the button, but we're actually initializing an application and then we're doing the create user with email and password. What would happen if you had 2 or 3 buttons on the screen, all needing Firebase? You can't do Firebase initialize app in every single one of them. So the solution to this is kind of like initializing your Firebase application before you start with everything else on your screen and on your phone. So there is good documentation of how to do that, and I've actually linked to that. So I'm going to bring it here. So what we need to do is take advantage of something called Widgets Flutter binding. And what happens, to be honest with you, here is that Firebase, it needs to kickstart its process before everything else is rendered on the screen. And in order for that to happen, it needs to have some sort of the core Flutter engine to be in place, and so that it can make its call to the core Flutter engine and say that I'm done with my work. So in order to do that, then you need something called Widgets Flutter binding. So I'm gonna bring up the caption for that, and I can show you that this is the documentation that I'm showing you as of link there. So in your void function here, before we actually, you see, maybe I'm jumping over a little bit, but what we're trying to do is to try to fix this issue here that we're awaiting on Initialize app on Firebase. Okay, so we don't want to do this on the press of a button. We actually want to do it somewhere else. And in order to be able to do that somewhere else, we have to first take care of this widget binding. Okay, so in your main function in here, then say, I think we need to say widgets flutter binding dot ensure initialized, like that. Okay. And if you want to know more about that, I strongly suggest that you read this documentation that I've provided here. Okay. So now that that is in place, now that you've done that, do a hot restart. Okay. So you're going to lose your state here after the hot restart, and that's okay. I'm going to take that in my notes that I've talked about that. Now, as you know, this Initialize app is a feature. You see, is a feature of Firebase app. Now, what you need to do is kind of like you want to tell Flutter to not build this column before it has finished doing that feature. And the way to do that is using Flutter's Future Builder widget. Future Builder, it takes a future, it performs the future, and once this future has succeeded or it has failed doing its work, it will give you a callback. And in that callback, it asks you to actually produce a widget you want to display to the user depending on the state of that future's result. So it basically, instead of you having to do this initialization of Firebase every time a user presses the button, you say, I'm not going to do anything until that is done. Once that is done, or if it errors out, let me know. Then I will give you a widget to display to the user depending on the results. Okay. So what we're going to do is going to go to this body, which is a column right now, command dot, and then let's see, stream builder we have, but we don't have future builder. So I'm just going to say command dot wrap with widget, and I'm going to say future builder. Okay, so I'm going to build a future. As you can see, it says, okay, builder is required. So let's put a builder parameter here. And if you're like me and you forget these syntaxes, you can just control space in Visual Studio Code on Mac or command space in Linux and Windows to get help. And then you'll just use this syntax there. Okay, so bring your entire column here. You see this until the end of the column without the comma. Then you remove your child, bring that entire thing and put a return here and just place it there. Okay, like that. Now your future builder, it doesn't have an actual future to perform. So for its future, let's see. I'm gonna say that we've talked about the future builder. And what we need to do now is to grab this future from here. You see, await Firebase Initialize app, and grab that future without the await, remove the wait, and put it in the future builder's future parameter, like that. All right, Command S on a hot restart, and you can see nothing has really happened on the screen. So you didn't have any difference. You don't notice any difference, basically. So if everything really worked as it should, then what we need to do then is to, if everything is working as expected, then we should be able to register a user. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to provide the exact same user already registered and then say register. And you'll see now we get an error. Let's see if I can show you the error. And it says the error is Firebase auth email already in use. The email address is already in use by another account. And that is this part, which I'm going to bring the caption up for you. So we've also talked about that. All right. So the next topic that I want to talk about before we close off and round off for this chapter is connection states. You see, we told Future Builder to perform a future. The future was Firebase Initialize app, okay, this thing. Now, if you look at the builder, what we're returning from it right now is a column, but we're completely ignoring the parameters that are coming in here. The second parameter that gets passed to your builder is something called a snapshot of data type async snapshot, as you can see there. An async snapshot of an object is the state of that object right now, okay? So, and that object itself is actually the result of your future, in this case, Firebase app. So It's just that it didn't understand that this snapshot is an async snapshot of your Firebase app. But that's okay. We don't actually need the Firebase app in the snapshot. However, one thing that you do need in this snapshot is its state. You see, a future has a start point, it has a line where it processes its information, and it has an endpoint. It either ends successfully or it fails. Now, the snapshot is your way of getting the results of your future, whether uh, has it started, is it processing, is it done, or did it fail? So, what we need to do in here, as we're waiting for Firebase Initialize app to do its work, we're gonna basically say we're loading. Just tell the user loading, and as soon as the snapshot is done, then we're gonna say that loading has finished. So let's do that. Let's go in here and say switch snapshot. I believe it's called connection state. All right. And then get help from Visual Studio Code to complete this. So I'm going to say add missing case clauses. And you can see there are so many different cases, right? Done, waiting, active, and done. All right. So for none, waiting, let's just say everything else except for done, we're going to return like a text that just says loading. So let's say in here we remove all of these. Okay. In the done statement, we say return this entire column all the way here, right? And then we don't need the break because we said return. And then we're going to say default. Default is a special case which is not actually inside that enumeration, but is a case that says everything else that I haven't handled. And in this case, we just say return text loading, something like this, as a constant, okay? So I'm gonna hot restart. And to be honest with you, this is happening so fast that we're not actually seeing the loading, but at least we have handled the case that if, for instance, a user's connection is too slow or their device is too slow, when the future has finished, they will see this column. I'm going to actually fold it. And if this future hasn't finished yet, it's not done, then they will see this text offloading. All right. And by the way, this is how you can actually fold and unfold things in Visual Studio Code. So fold like this, unfold. All right. It's a great way of seeing more of your code. So wow, a lot of information. This video took an hour, kind of like as I expected. So we now have a basic Firebase setup. We've done our initialization of the application of our Firebase. We talked about a lot of widgets, actually. We talked about column. We talked about text, feature builder, text field, container, app bar, so many things. So this is a lot of content. And if you didn't get all of it, that's okay. We're going to talk more about these in the upcoming chapters. But I strongly suggest that, I mean, if you're watching this course and if you're just watching it, and if you're an advanced developer and you're watching, that's completely fine. But if you're not a developer, or if you're a junior developer or someone who doesn't have so much experience with Flutter development and you're really trying to learn everything I'm saying here, please don't just watch this video. Go and do this yourself. Go and write this code. Pause the video as I'm talking. I know I talk a little bit fast, but that's just to save a little bit of time. Pause the video, write the code as I write it, test it as I tested, and see the results for yourself, because that's how you will learn, not just by watching. So great. We've talked a lot about widgets and Firebase configuration. And in the next chapter, we're going to talk about login screen and also email verification, and also clean up our registration screen. So without further ado, let's just prepare ourselves for the next chapter, and I'll see you there.